start sharing with us. She can start sharing with us about two wonderful open source resources that she uses quite a bit in her work. So let me introduce our presenter today, and this is Kaycie Maddox, and Kaycie is from Georgia, if you haven't already picked that up. I personally have known Kaycie, oh my goodness, Kaycie, what, 20 plus years, something like that. And she's been one of my dearest colleagues here in Georgia, working with her in terms of the statistics standards. Kaycie's actually been in education for 42 years. I know you won't believe that by looking at her, but she has. She taught middle school mathematics for 5 years. She taught high school mathematics for 21 years. And she is currently the director of the Northeast Georgia Regional Agency here in, did I say that right, Kaycie?
Well, I'm the director of middle and high school math. I'm not the director.
Right, the director of the mathematics, the 6th through 12. She's not the actual director. I don't think she wants that job. But she's had that position for 16 years, and I can't tell you how fabulous she is. She has been very service oriented in Georgia. She is a past president of the Georgia Council of Supervisors in Georgia. She's also a past president of the Georgia Council of Mathematics Teachers here in Georgia. She is a past chair of our joint ASA NCTM committee. So she's worked constantly at the national level. She's also been a co-facilitator for our meeting within a meeting at the middle school level for 5 years. She's also our facilitator for our AP Statistics learning community here in the Northeast Georgia region. That's been over 15 years, right, Kaycie?
Well, I guess so. I hadn't thought about that way, but that's,
yeah, I think it's for over 15 years, she's helped to facilitate our AP Stat teachers learning community, and it's still going strong, which I think is phenomenal. Right now, she's gotten herself involved in a lot of resource development work with the Georgia Department of Education in relation to the new statistics standards that are in our Georgia standards revision. She's actually leading the virtual resource developments for the advanced algebra course, or algebra 2, as some people used to call it algebra 2. We now call it advanced algebra. And it now has a new format where about 35% of the course is now statistics and data science based. So Kaycie keeps herself busy. She's actually retired, but she still works part-time, but you would think that she works full-time. I don't think she knows the difference. Yeah. She's a mother to 5 children. She has 6 grandchildren, and she has a wonderful husband who loves baseball like I do. Yeah. So that's really great. And she's just a dear friend. And I'm excited for her to be here today to tell us about the Utah Middle School project, as well as the Math Vision project, which are open resources. And she's going to talk a little bit about how to access them and navigate the websites, but also how she uses them within our school systems here in Georgia. So Kaycie, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you for having me and let me be with you today. I have the privilege of working with teachers in the classroom regularly as a math mentor in the state of Georgia. That's just the fancy title for those of us that work at RESA with math. And Renee Hord, who's with us, is also a math mentor in Georgia, just in the opposite corner. But when I think about using fantastic resources, I always want to think about that they meet some criteria. And so, and I'm going to talk about math in general for just a second, and then be very specific to statistics. And is it okay, Renee? Rebecca, if I share my screen, that works?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Do you have, yeah, go for it. And yes.
Okay, it says that you need to allow that.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
Oh,
Oh,
wow.
okay, I think I need to probably make you. I probably need to make you the host. So I'm gonna switch you over, or at least I'll make you a co-host. Let's see if that works.
All right. Okay, we're going to try again. But there's some criteria that I look at. I'm not going to talk about these a long time, but I do want us to take a look at a couple of things, and it's not letting me get to, hold on just a sec. I'm not.
Want me to make you a host? Do you want me to make you a host?
Let's see. All right, is that okay, Rebecca, now?
Do you want me to, I'm sorry, I missed it. Do you want me to make you the host?
That'll be fine. I was just going to make sure you've done that.
Okay, hold on just a second. Okay, I hope that works.
Okay. I am trying to, let me see if this is going to let me do what I want it to do. All of a sudden, it's showing me some interesting things. So one of the things that I use, this is from NCTM, is the effective teaching practices. So it's establishing math goals, implementing tasks that promote reasoning, building conceptual understanding from procedural fluency, students discussing what they know. So that really guides how I help teachers and others find resources. Most textbooks would not be set up this way. And so it's really important to find curriculum resources that let you do this and really build toward this idea of students talking and owning and discussing the math. Another thing that I keep in mind is a resource that's already built to support the standards of mathematical practice and showing us how students are supposed to be engaged in this process of knowing and understanding and being agents of their own learning. And then another resource that I use are the 5 practices for orchestrating productive math discussions. So all of these things about anticipating what students would know and do, monitoring their work, selecting students to explain their work, sequencing them in a specific way, and then connecting the representations of the work are all really important ideas when it comes to how we choose resources. And that all of that's true for mathematics in general, but specifically for resources that we might use that are open source. So the first one I wanted to show you was Open Up Resources High School Curriculum. And I'm going to see if I can navigate this. Rebecca, you let me know if there's at some point something you can't see. I'm it makes me sign in every single time. This is the Mathematics Vision Project in its new reboot where it's married up with Open Up Resources. And this is the Algebra 1 course. And this is their Unit 9 modeling with data. And I won't go through and talk to you about all that, but I do want to talk a little bit about how Mathematics Vision Project sets up their open source materials. This started as soon as the Common Core was coming out, and based on the Common Core. They also based it on those 3 documents I just shared with you about the effective teaching practices, the standards for mathematical practice, and the 5 practices for orchestrating mathematics discussion. They incorporate a learning cycle, and sometimes there are 2 or 3 cycles in any one unit. And the learning cycle is a develop understanding lesson, which has a low threshold, a high accessibility by almost every student that you'd ever have. A solidifying lesson, then where they're solidifying what they learned, you might have 2 or 3 of those, and then a practice understanding lesson. And it provides a whole lot of guidance for teachers in planning. It even gives them a stepped out lesson plan about their cycle of launch, explore, discuss. They have obviously have outlined learning goals and takeaways and vocabulary. And we often use a tip chart, Chris and I do when we're teaching together, and they do that as well. And then they have practice and ready, set, go. And the ready is getting you ready for prerequisite skills. The set is solidifying what you just learned, and the go is cyclical review. So if you'll indulge me just a minute, I'm going to go to, they also have PowerPoint presentations. And so I'm going to go to the presentation of one of their lessons for their statistics unit with Algebra 1. And of course, in Algebra 1, this lesson in particular is going to be looking at a line of regression, which is one of the standards that we use in Georgia for Algebra 1 and also in Utah, obviously. And so it gives them a scenario, and then it gives them, which is what we always start with when we're working through, we want a real life situation and we want a statistical question that's going to arise. And so they go ahead and give them then a scatter plot that's there and begin to ask questions about that scatter plot. And then they go through and have this opportunity to say, let's compare this to scatter plots that might represent what women earn. And then they did this original launch question as a scatter plot for what men earn with a high school diploma. Then they looked at what women earned with a high school diploma. And now, after they made a comparison, they then said, maybe it's not a gender thing, maybe it's more or less about degrees. So let's look at bachelor degrees and so on. So I wanted you to see that they're in the business of trying to do the statistical problem-solving process in how they set up lessons. And the goal of the lesson is, again, for students to make decisions and draw conclusions, for you to discuss that with them, and then for them to even be ready to practice. They have what's known as an exit ticket for them to move away, give you more information. And then they also have their takeaways. And so what claims can we make from this now that we've gone through this in-depth study? Actually, scatter plots are begun in 8th grade, but this line of regression and the correlation coefficient all take shape and take place in Algebra 1. They, even with other lessons in this same unit, have them take a set of data, calculate the correlation coefficient with technology, and then begin to move the Y values, change the Y values on those ordered pairs to see what changes happen to the correlation coefficient. So they're really having a great way for students to own the learning. And that's what's so important to me. They're not teaching algorithms. They're, again, using technology as they should be when it comes to that line of regression. I wanted to just highlight in geometry, one of the things that they're doing there as well. And so in this launch, they're actually using the Titanic as an example. And so I was talking to Chris as we began this, that I was using a lesson that she and Gary Cater put together for us on a case of possible discrimination. And here is a scenario where people were on the Titanic. And of course, many people died in that tragic accident, but a number of them were saved. And they began to take a look. A lot of geometry standards have to do with probability, and interpreting a two-way table or a contingency table, and looking at conditional probability and so on. So they begin this process of looking at, could I fill out a contingency table, much like we did in the lesson that Chris and I have done before with the case of possible discrimination. And they began to look at, is there any kind of discrimination based on the class of ticket that you were able to buy? And it calls on them to use this terminology. You notice that that's not typical terminology, but it is some notational terminology that's there. And for them to draw some conclusions and support their conclusions with probability. So often probability is just addressed as a mathematical exercise, I guess you might say. But I'm very happy to report that in Mathematics Vision Project, this is typical of the way that they approach teaching and learning for all mathematics standards, but particularly for the statistics standards. And of course, then it even goes through vocabulary with them, and they're coming down to, they need to actually solidify these ideas as they go through, but they do it through a scenario and the statistical problem solving process. So it's a great opportunity for teachers to actually not use algorithms, but come to understanding and make sense of what they're doing. And I wanted to highlight one other thing in Algebra 2. In the algebra standards for Algebra 2, it doesn't require that they do the tests of normality, which you do in AP Stat, but something interesting that they do, they don't have PowerPoint presentations for Algebra 2 right now. In fact, I know the teacher that's doing that for them. She's one of the teachers that I've worked with here in Northeast Georgia RESA for a long time, but they give them a number of examples of this is normal, this is not, this is normal, this is not, this is normal. And notice the representations they're giving them. And then it's what all of these have in common. What could you compile and understand about what makes something normal without actually going through the tests of normality, but trying to compose those characteristics. And they even go so far as to comparing that with box plots and so on. I wanted to applaud their opportunities that they have for teachers to look deeply and make sense of them without having to be so formalized. And so at any rate, I'm going to share with you some more about Utah Middle School Math Project, but I wanted to stop just a second. I just talked a whole bunch about Mathematics Vision Project, and I wanted to give you a chance to ask some questions. I'm so familiar with it that very often I fail to say things that people might be curious about. It is a free open resource. It is married up with Open Up resources now, so you do have to go in and make an account. But there's nothing to purchase. They have assessments as well as vocabulary help and help for English language learners and a number of other things that are there. But I particularly like the way that they work with the standards that are there for Algebra 1 and geometry. They also have, and for Algebra 2. Does anybody have a question or want to say something about Math Vision Project so far?
I've got a question. This is Holly Lynn, NC State. Hi. So, and I logged in a little bit late, so you may have addressed this at the very beginning, but I could tell from the unit that you showed us, it didn't appear that they're really using much technology. Do they integrate different technologies into their materials?
They suggest you integrate technology, and I just didn't highlight one of those lessons. Particularly in the lesson where they have given you data sets for a scatter plot, and then you're going to have the line of regression. They then ask you to use technology to change the Y values to see what that does, what effect that has on the correlation coefficient. And I've used Desmos with that. But we've used other apps that for technology use. That Artistat has several apps that we've used there, and it doesn't give you a particular technology to use, but they do use technology and suggest it often. Yes. Any other questions or thoughts there? Well, one of the things that I find when I work with teachers through Mathematics Vision Project, often they are extremely confident about the mathematics standards. They're not so confident about the statistics standards. And so when we're having the opportunity to work through these, the lessons that are built for them to be rich tasks where they learn procedural fluency from conceptual understanding, as you see in the effective teaching practices, and really highlighting the standards of mathematical practice. I find my teachers grow in depth in their understanding of the statistics standards, as well as their confidence. A lot of their confidence or lack thereof is that if they can find an answer to a question, a statistics kind of question with our high school standards, they don't understand it but by using the algorithm. And conditional probability with a contingency table is just golden. You don't have to have an algorithm at all. And you do have to understand how to use the contingency table, or use a Venn diagram and a tree diagram and figure all of that out as well. That's more a middle school standard. But sometimes it's hard to convince a teacher when they look at this material that it is authentic, though, because it doesn't look like typical things they'd see in a textbook, or maybe out of their experience in a statistics course in college. And obviously they didn't have great people like Holly Lynn and Chris teaching them in college, you know, otherwise they would have seen things like that and would have been very happy to approach them. But so it really builds a lot of content strength, but also confidence for teachers to be able to use these ideas. Another nice thing about Math Vision Project is they give you all the answers. And so a lot of times the answers are, this depends on student discussion. You know, it doesn't have everything that students would say, but that's what it's built for, is for students to come to these conclusions. And then that's what the takeaways are for, is at the end of the lesson, what is it that I've learned and what do I understand that's so vitally important? So particularly, I find my middle school teachers in the resource that I use with them so frequently are much more open to using a different kind of resource. My high school teachers tend to be very set in particular in that straightforward direct teaching mode, rather than in having an opening. And I find it with if I can convince them to try these open resources for the statistics units, then they're more open to trying them for the other units, which are equally wonderful. And in that they are built towards students owning their learning and putting them in the right spot for learning particular standards. Well, if you don't mind, unless there's another question, then I'll talk about Utah Middle School. Well, let me go back to Math Vision Project real quick. I call it MVP a lot. I don't work for them, but I have worked through so much of what they have in their product. This is the first year they've launched themselves in conjunction with Open Up Resources. And there are 5 authors. They're out of Utah, and one of them is a classroom teacher. So he's practicing all of this at the same time that he's helping to write and develop and all of that. And so when I discovered it several years ago, it was when it first came out, I was just overwhelmed at the depth of the material. Convincing folks to try it, and to try it with fidelity and over the long haul, has been quite the interesting thing. And I find teachers have to be ready for that kind of open source because it is a different teaching stance. It is the teaching stance I've taught with Chris Franklin a number of years now in a number of scenarios. And that's the stance that all of the tasks that she uses are written, and those that you find on the ASA website in their resources as well. So it's great that there's a lightness of mind in that idea of using Mathematics Vision Project. I have probably 10 high schools in my RESA region. I serve about 27 high schools that are using Math Vision Project as their major curriculum resource. And we have some very wonderful data about that as well. But I do recommend the statistics units in particular. All right, well, I'm going to share my screen again then. Let's see if I can see where I am. And this time I'd like to talk about Utah Middle School Math project. This was also out of Utah. I don't have a propensity for just people in Utah, I promise. When we did our initial training with Mathematics Vision Project, my RESA sent me to a professional learning with the MVP authors because we couldn't bring them to Georgia. We couldn't work that out. And so I came back, and just before school started in July of 2017, I had about 45 or 50 teachers from our area that came together to study Math Vision project. And among them, I had a number of 8th grade teachers that were there that were teaching Algebra 1 in the 8th grade. So once we started talking about Math Vision project for, I think that was a 4-day training, after about the first 2 days, they came to me and said, we'd like something like this that is focused on the effective teaching practices. They didn't know to call them that, but that whole idea that we're going to find rich tasks that really promote reasoning and understanding based on our learning goals, building conceptual understanding, allowing students to discuss and discover. And so they said, we'd like that for all of middle school. Where do we find that? And I said, I don't know. I'm so happy to have found MVP. Well, by the next day, they had found it. And I don't know what prompted them to look again in Utah, but when you just Google Utah middle school math, this is what pops up. And so this was developed by 5 other authors, but with the same ideas in mind: the standards of mathematical practice, the effective teaching practices, getting students to talk about their understanding. And so in doing so, it gives teachers, middle school teachers, a great deal to look at. And you'll notice it's for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. This doesn't show, if I go to my 6th grade tab, you'll see the student materials and then the teacher support materials. And I'll put it in the chat. Let me see if I'll do that in just a minute. I can't navigate Zoom and chat and talk at the same time. There is a password to get into the teacher materials, but they share the same password over and over again, and I'll share that password with you as well. But today I wanted to highlight just a couple of things, just again, not trying to get us way off track and too deep in the weeds here, but I'm going to just highlight the statistics unit for 6th grade. And with the standards of mathematical practice in every unit that they have, they really highlight the mathematical practices with particular items or examples that come from that unit itself. Case in point, make sense of problems and persevere in solving them. You'll see that this is a bar graph, or a histogram rather, histogram. And so it gives then examples of all of these practices within the confines of statistics. And so it's a tremendous tool for teachers to see that, and for even them to use those with students and see them on display in the room. But it gives students a foretaste of what might be coming in that unit, and parents as well. So I really like the fact that it takes the standards of mathematical practice and makes them specific to the unit. It helps the teachers. There is, of course, a unit overview, but it helps the teachers to see how that's going to work. And in every chapter, there's also what they call an anchor problem. Actually, every section of every chapter might have 2 or 3 sections. And so this anchor problem is about the Electoral College, and you'll notice it's from Illustrative Mathematics, a task that's there. And so the students are going to go through the statistical problem solving process with this particular problem, even though at the beginning of this unit, they may not be able to answer everything that's asked about this anchor problem. They'll come back to it over and over again. And so it gives them a way to get students oriented to the kind of thinking that they'll use. And so it's very important that students have that opportunity. I'm going to skip. I've learned how to do this in PDF land, so let's see if I can skip down. So it gives us a way then to also talk about statistical questions, and I'm pulled the wrong page number, so that's why I'm having to back up. So this whole idea, this is a big idea in 6th grade from the Common Core, but it is really a basis of our statistical investigative process. And so it goes through this idea of what are statistical questions, and more specifically, giving them a definition and then having them make some choices. I know that as I've discussed this, and we've discussed this on the joint committee before, it's really hard to narrow down or to peg down an exact definition of a statistical question, as opposed to just any other typical mathematical question that you might have. And so it's really nice that this material gives us that opportunity to be more specific. They go into a great deal of depth about numerical versus categorical data. I find that in the meeting within a meeting work that we've done across the United States and even in Canada on that one occasion, that clarifying numerical versus categorical data with even teachers is not, it's still a murky area. So I'm glad that they devote good time to that at the very least. And so there is so much practice in this resource, and they intend for there to be way more practice than you would ever use with a student, so that you have the opportunity to pick and choose what you might like to use. They also have very often, not every day, but very often, this idea of spiral review. And that's also the case in Math Vision Project, that they have spiral review or cyclical review every single day. So now they've got a small scenario here, and they're again emphasizing the idea of a statistical question. I wanted to also highlight the idea that at the end of every section, they have a self-assessment. And so the self-assessment is based on the learning goals that come out of the standards for 6th grade. And you'll notice this minimal, partial, sufficient, and substantial understanding is not just something generic. It's very specific to that learning goal. So minimal understanding, I can recognize a statistical question in some contexts. I can recognize it in a variety. Oh, I can recognize in a variety of contexts and create them. I can do the same, and I can rephrase questions that are not statistical into statistical questions. And so it's one thing, this has a high effect size when it comes to the world of effective educational strategies, this idea of using self-assessment. And not only do students just get to assess themselves, but it gives you then a way to have evidence. Notice that this 1 and 2 refer to questions, or to not questions, but to learning goals 1 and 2 to serve as evidence of that. So that sometimes is a very lacking in a lot of resources that we have. And I really like the way that it talks about these learning goals for this part of the statistics unit. They also utilize simulations, which is one of the big hallmarks of learning conceptually, particularly in statistics. And so this is grab a handful of link cubes or those snap cubes from your teacher, and count the number of cubes in your hand and write them down on a sticky note. And then you begin to take on a little bit more of the concepts that are about to come upon us here. And in fact, the concepts that are about to come upon us here is this idea of mean, and what does mean mean? And so notice now, here is mean is fair share. The Gaze document had been published already when the Utah Middle School math resources came out, and they go through mean is fair share, mean is balance point, and then they even, I'm sorry to scroll so fast, they even then take that on in a variety of data displays. And let's see if I can skip down to page 60, because I don't want to scroll that much. But when it comes to mean is balance point, then it begins with finding the center with just 2 data points, then increasing the number of data points. And then from there, they develop the idea of mean absolute deviation, And they do that again without an algorithm, which is best because the algorithm for mean absolute deviation is horrendous looking. That's why the state of Georgia had the wisdom, I don't know, I'm using that term lightly, to put it in 9th grade because it had a summation notation in it. And 6th grade teachers just thought that is just way too much. Fortunately, it's going back to 6th grade as a way of talking about variation, because the state of Georgia has now removed that formula. But it talks about variability here, and then it talks about the idea that all we know so far for variability is range. And so now we need to have another measure of variability, and that's where we're going to talk about the sum of the absolute deviations and then the mean absolute deviation. So it's got quite, and I think, an impact on the way that teachers might look at using that. That was just 6th grade. 7th grade is largely, again, it's following the Common Core, but I think it equally shows wisdom and the influence of the Gaze document on those levels A, B, and C within the work that they do with students. Even in the work that they do in probability, again, much like Math Vision Project, it's not just a calculation, a mathematical event. It's it's for understanding and to be used statistically and not just as a calculation. And again, I could sing the praises of Utah Middle School Math Project resources for all the standards in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. They are the Common Core standards, unlike the high school standards. 6th, 7th, and 8th grade are the same set, no matter what state you're in. If states are using the Common Core. With the Common Core came out for high school, all of the standards for high school were kind of in the same bucket, and it was up to each state then to divvy out and say what goes in Algebra 1, what goes in Algebra 2, what goes in geometry. So that's not as uniform as it would be for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Again, I find these resources help teachers really grow and deepen their understanding of statistics, and again, give them confidence. As I was stating just a minute ago, the state of Georgia has put mean absolute deviation in 9th grade. That's where it sits right now and has for about 6 or 7 years. But I have a whole school district that has moved to using Utah Middle School Math as their resource. And so one of the 7th grade teachers was in the statistics unit. And of course, mean absolute deviation is in the 6th grade unit for Utah and resources. But she was in the 7th grade unit, and they were talking about variation with mean absolute deviation. So she just went back into the 6th grade stuff, taught the MAD real quickly, and then used it. And when she told me what she'd done, I was just going, Mindy, that's just tremendous that you would feel the confidence. She goes, well, I figured if I could do all this other stuff statistically, I could even go back and own that as well. Whereas everybody else in the state was going, we don't have to do that MAD now, you know. So now that it's going back into 6th grade, this is one of the great ways outside of the lesson that Chris has on the STU website for ASA, which is mean and variability from the mean. That's a tremendous task as well. But this is within a curriculum resource that's free and an open resource. So let me put it, now that I'm not sharing anymore, let me put in the chat, if I can get the chat to come up, the password for the Utah Middle School Math teacher resources. I didn't make a typo. That's MMAISE. I'm sure it's like Mary Mays or Meredith Mays or somebody was the one that set that password. And so that's the password to get to all the teacher resources. And they do supply answers with all of that. Unfortunately, Utah Middle School Math doesn't come with assessments. Math Vision Project does. But there's so many problems that you would never give all of that to students. So you have plenty of resources to have other quizzes beyond what's provided, as well as to make your own assessments. I find particularly with statistics that it is a difficult thing for teachers to make authentic assessments. It's much more broken down into a mathematical process. They might even be willing to use tasks like these and this learning trajectory with their students, but when they give an assessment, it's very cut and dry and very down mathematical and DOK 1 all the way. So this gives you lots of opportunities to create your own assessments. Anybody want to ask a question about all of that? Well, Chris, as you were helping us along with this, and Rebecca, that was what I wanted to share about those two resources. I'd be happy to help anybody look at those things more deeply later. Excuse me. I just wanted to highlight some things that I find particularly wonderful about the statistics units.
So does anyone have questions they'd like to ask Kaycie?
So I have a question, and I don't know, it's not about the resources per se, but I just have to say, so I'm a high school teacher. I'm actually a new teacher, right? So I'm here, I really appreciate all the resources. I teach advanced statistics, and I was just blown away by the amount of statistical material that is in the curriculum for middle school, Algebra 1 geometry and Algebra 2, because I have 3 children of my own, 16, 15, 12. They're not getting this. The students that I have coming into advanced statistics, by and large, aren't getting this. I don't know if this is a product of the pandemic, that people are sort of leaving statistics, probability, and cutting down the curriculum. And I don't know if it's just like where we happen to be, but you know, in other places like in Georgia, do you find that teachers are able to cover all of these things and bring all these statistical ideas into their algebra and geometry classes? Or you know,
I'll tell you what I think, and thank you for pointing that out, and congratulations on being a new teacher and coming into this wonderful profession. It's in the standards, but if they're going to cut something, they cut the statistics. And unfortunately, as with the 2 resources I shared today, those are at the end of the resource. They're not at the beginning. And so Chris and I were involved in a project in Florida a couple of years ago, and we were working with teachers to learn to teach conceptually, like many of the things we've shared with you today. So we were working with half of the middle school teachers and not working with the other half of the middle school teachers. And thus the experiment ensued about how well students would learn and understand. One of the things that was most remarkable when we first arrived at the school where we were going to be working together prior to school starting, it was just our team working together, their student books that are consumables were left in the room, and all of the pages were torn out where they had worked in the student workbook, except for the statistics pages. They were all still there. So it's kind of universal that, but I'm going to also say, I hope nobody from assessment is listening at this point in time, but when it comes to assessment on our state test, our students perform as well, if not better, on the statistics domain as they do in algebra and geometry. Now, I don't know what that says. I can draw a whole lot of conclusions about that, but it makes me think that if a lot of teachers, if some teachers are teaching it poorly or from an algorithmic stance, or they're not teaching it at all, the questions must be simple enough. Is that a good way to say it, Chris? Simple enough that students feel pretty confident in answering them. So I certainly promote it in our area and just shout it from the hilltops. Of course, Chris doesn't live very far from me, and she works with our teachers a lot too. So that might be a confidence boost for them. But I'll tell you, in the state of Georgia, we're revising standards and we've just adopted them. And not that our curriculum maps have been published yet, but it has been for when we go into these revised standards in 2023. But the statistics units are first. in our curriculum maps now, because it needs we have great leadership here in the state of Georgia, and they were very wise that they want these statistics standards to permeate the rest of the course. So if you do them first, you get to them, but then you can also use those ideas. Even well, we have statistics standards in 23 that are going to in 2023 that are going to start in kindergarten. So we'll have them K-12. So move to Georgia, join us.
Yeah, I was
I
going to
don't
comment
live with kids. I'm teasing.
when we
From
started
North
working-
Carolina originally, so it's not that far.
Okay.
I was going to say, when we started working with some people in New York, when they were first doing the Engage New York stuff, we were working with teachers there and doing a workshop, and a couple of the teachers, it was the second year, and they said, a couple of the teachers, said, oh, well, but statistics is only 10% of our assessment. So if I'm going to skip something, that's what I'm going to skip. And two of the other teachers jumped on them and said, but you know what? It's 10% that our students can get if we just cover it, and said, so you're going to spend that 10% of that extra time on stuff that they may or may not get. If you want to improve your assessments, make sure you cover this. And then they said they've moved, just what you guys, did, is they said, we don't have to cover in any order. So we've moved the statistics first. And they said, when students are coming back from the summer after having had a break, it's actually a nice way to bring them in and get them engaged with mathematics, because there's so many interesting applications. And so doing that first gets them there, present, excited, and then we can move on to the the other stuff. And so they made a pretty convincing case that I think, but whether it's a popular case, I don't know, but I don't hear it being made that often, but other than by people like Chris and Kaycie. So.
Well, I know there are other states that are, there's a lot of standards revisions going on right now. And a lot of other states are looking more deeply at incorporating statistics. If they haven't already, they've been in the Common Core, they should have been doing it for grades 6 through 12. But really, whether or not they have them at K-5, as Georgia is moving into, or not, but making them more prominent and more user-friendly. It's an awesome, it also often gives light to the theory we study in mathematics so much. I mean, slope and intercept on a line, okay, woohoo. But when I start applying it to a line of regression and then talking about how well this line predicts and blah, blah, I mean, it's much more interesting that way, and much more friendly and user-friendly for an everyday life situation. So it's like preaching to the choir. You all know that, though. So.
Right. It was interesting to me today. I've met with the teachers that I've met with. This is like the third time that I've met with them. And so I think they're starting to feel comfortable. And they said to me today, listen, we love the idea of the statistics and all, but honestly, we don't feel like we have the confidence that we can do this justice. And they were very open with me. And they said, what can you do between now and the fall of 2003 to help us, become more confident and feel more efficacy, I guess you could say, around being able to do that. And so I've so respected their vulnerability in saying, this is the area I always skip because I don't feel confident teaching it. And that was interesting to me today, that's something we have to look at, is how do we, I'm setting up play dates. That's the only thing I need to do was to say, okay, that's great. I'm going to pull some statistical things and set up some play dates, and we're just going to play with math because they need that confidence.
Well, that's Chris came. That's how, well, I met Chris before all of that happened. But when we had our big standards changed from in 2008, we moved to performance-based standards well, they weren't standards before. It was just a list of items. It was called the Common Core. And so it would just say ratio and proportion. It wouldn't tell you what you did with it, So standards was quite the move. So we asked Chris, and then she brought in Gary Cater, who's a wonderful statistician, and they did workshops with people in our RESA region for each summer for, I think, 4 summers in a row, wasn't it, Chris? Yeah. And so, so it was all about giving teachers the opportunity to encounter these kinds of tasks, to learn the statistics. And and those had incredible outcomes from them. But in the work that we did at that project in Florida, where I was telling you, we worked with half the teachers, and then the other half we did not work with. One of the cool things that we learned, or that we did there, I think is called micro teaching. After we did the lessons with the teachers in professional learning, the last day of the professional learning, they taught them back to us. And that, and we sat there, and I don't know that we had to, I mean, I don't know why I'm saying we, I don't know why Chris didn't have to correct, but just a couple of things, but they really had made those lessons their own. Sometimes the scenario had to be changed for the particular circumstance that we were in, but they did that seamlessly. And what they did then was tremendous. So that idea of micro teaching, they encounter a task, but then they teach it to other teachers before they go in the classroom. And that has a high effect size on teacher confidence, and accessibility then of students having access to the curriculum. Yeah.
Yeah, and I sometimes tell people, that we believe, we say one of our goals is for our students to become lifelong learners, but that applies to us as well. And so we have to be willing to tackle some of these new things. And just like for our students, it's not going to be comfortable the first time you do it. But the only way you get better is by doing it and practicing. And for students, it's so, data literacy is so important that, it's better for our students if they come along with us on our journey as we learn how to teach it, than if we just don't ever show them it, if we just pretend it doesn't exist. So, and I think teachers, the teachers that are coming to the kinds of things that you guys are doing, they want to do a good job for their students. That's why they're there. And so it's really just, kind of encouraging them to say, it probably won't be perfect the first time you do it, but it'll be better than not doing it at all. And you'll get better just with practice, just like your students get better with practice. So.
That's called a growth mindset, when you feel that way about yourself and others. And I think that's, especially for high school math teachers, they have a growth mindset toward their students a lot of times, but toward themselves, I don't know already. And there's plenty of stuff, and nobody can hold everything together. There's plenty of stuff that I've got to grow in my learning about. So yeah. That's a very good point, Roxy.
I'm just going to jump in real quick and promote something we do. I work at NC State and do work with Holly Lynn, who was here previously. And we actually have a resource around professional learning for statistics education. So I'm going to pop it in the chat just so you also have it. We talked about it maybe in April of last year, so you might already be aware, but since we're talking about teachers and their need to grow in the area of statistics, I thought I'd pop it in.
Thank you. We love the work that Holly Lynn has been doing.
Yeah,
And
it's exciting to see teachers get excited about statistics. For such a long time, it's been a area where teachers shy away, and you're starting to see a lot of teachers start to actually see its value, and it's great.
Mhm.
well, so many times they've only had one statistics course in college, and it was very algorithmically driven. Oftentimes, not all the time, but so that doesn't make for building confidence or appreciation for statistics. So yeah, what Holly Lynn's work has been tremendous in that regard.
You might see Kaycie in a video or two, and Chris.
You're gonna have to find some new blood after a while. That's right.
Well, I'd like to promote what Kaycie is, as I mentioned earlier, Kaycie has facilitated for so many years. If teachers could set up learning communities, I think oftentimes our teachers feel very isolated in their schools. And, when it's amazing for me to have watched this learning community that we've had at the Northeast Georgia RESA these teachers are always there helping each other. I mean, they send emails to each other during the day. It's truly incredible. I think the support that teachers can give each other as they're trying to get more competent teaching the statistics. So I think these learning communities are very powerful.
And they're so easy to do. I'm not a real happy fan of virtual learning. Now, meeting like this for us is a great opportunity, but and we would prefer that we could meet together in our PLC, but we've continued even during the pandemic, and we give a mock exam a couple weeks before the AP calculus, AP statistics exam, sorry, every year. We've done that for about 6 or 7 years now. And that's usually an in-person big event where we're grading our teachers in our learning community own are kind of the facilitators of each of our free response questions. And then we bring in people from UGA to help us grade and other high school math teachers to help us grade. And we give feedback to kids right away that day. It's an incredible event. So last year we had to be real creative because we couldn't get together and do that. So the teachers gave the mock exam in their own classes, and then they scanned the FRQs. And then I learned that you can put comments on a PDF. And so we gathered in them in teams virtually. So question 1, question 2, question 3, and so on. Some people were in person together, but others were joining virtually, and they could grade together virtually. And that really calibrates an expectation and understanding. It's great for the students to have the feedback, but it's especially helpful for the teachers that are involved in it. And so I'm the advanced statistics virtual facilitator for the state of Georgia this year. And as Chris said, I'm crazy. I should just quit and move to an island or something. There's just too much going on right now. But
she's too good.
Well, the thing is that I have opportunities to share just that. We'll have an expert panel. Chris will be there and a couple of our AP Stat people, and we'll talk about how we did that, and how you could do that, especially now virtually, so that because if you're the only AP Stat teacher and the next high school is 80 miles away, I mean, what are you going to do? It's hard to make a learning community. So Chris has been our kind of spiritual advisor for all these years, because she's our what is that? Our expert is what she is, but she's a gentle and benevolent expert is what she is. So it's helpful to have somebody that you could call on then. Catherine Case meets with us now, and she's another one of our experts. So that's always very helpful.
I think one of the things that has to happen, and I've been saying this for a while, is we really have to have a culture shift within our schools and within our school districts. And I'm really optimistic that maybe that cultural shift is happening in Georgia now with the new standards. But teachers can't go alone on this within their schools. It has to be something that's part of the community of the school, and there needs to be complete buy-in. So I think that's something we need to be thinking about as well with the statistics. Well, I think it's 2 minutes past 5:30. We like to try to keep this on time. So we usually have a meeting once a month. We'll try to, we're going to schedule one for December, but we'll be sure to make it early enough that it won't interfere with the holidays that are coming up. But we really appreciate you joining us today. And I want to say a big thank you to Kaycie for sharing what she shared with us today. These are wonderful resources that I'm not sure a lot of people are aware of these resources, but they're there. And like as Kaycie was mentioning, I think they've been quite successful and well received within many of the schools here in her district that she oversees. So thank you again, and have a wonderful Thanksgiving.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you again, Kaycie.
Oh, you're welcome. Have a great visit.
Thank you so much. Kaycie, do you mind stopping the recording?
Yes,
I
I can stop the recording.
Thank you.